this is the interesting part. The leaves itself has only 21,000 polygons. Like these polygons are only 21,000. Then I thought that why is it that this thing has 9 million faces? And that's when I remembered that I have added a geometry nodes modifier on top of these leaves. And if I shut this modifier, there you go. The faces have gone down to 21,000. It took me a little bit of time to try and wrap my head around how this thing will wrap around the box. So I also had to take my dad's help for it. And I've done the same kind of trick to all these other faces inside because I want a cardboard sort of look. So if I come in and move this here, you're going to see that underneath, you're going to see by default where you just have a cube unwrapped, you're going to see all of this thing coming inside, which you don't want. Optimization is so important. Like you get to learn so much when you optimize your scenes, and something which in an unoptimized scene is taking 1 minute and 10 seconds to render. If you can render that same scene out without losing quality in 10 seconds, you are a good 3D generalist. Om Namah Shivaya. Good morning, welcome back to inthekhud. This is 16 September 2023, 10:55 AM, and it's almost like a celebratory moment for me because we finally completed our third environment render in a matter of 4 days, and we did 3 days of documentation for it. This is gonna be the 4th day of documenting, and I went from polygon count and why is my scene at 9 million polygons or faces, viewport lag with geometry node system, proxy mesh, wrapping a texture on a box, complexity. Now the first thing I understood yesterday is about polygon count and why was my polygon count so high. So polygon count can be seen at 2 places. Here at the bottom, verts, faces, tries. So faces is the same as polygons inside Blender. Now the polygon faces here or polygons is at 171, 552, so 170,000 for a scene which is in rendered view inside cycles. It's not that big. I mean, I've only populated the scene to take effect as far as the camera is. Now obviously the camera has moved towards the end, but this is how it is. It's not like the entire scene is populated with stuff or something. So 170,000 faces is more or less fine, because what it does is it puts our render time at 13 seconds, which is fine because 13 seconds for rendering one frame is still acceptable. It's not a big problem. How do you know that your render is actually a problem is when your render is taking like 1 minute 30 seconds, 1 minute 40 seconds to render a single frame. That is when you know that there is a lot of optimization that has to be done, because even for a complex scene like this, 13 seconds rendering on cycles in GPU compute with a 3060 Ti should be acceptable. You could even come in here and enable statistics here, so you will see the same kind of information here. How do you read this? Currently it is showing the data for the entire scene, but let's say I wanted to see information only about this box, which is right here. So how do I see the information or polygon count for this box? By going to the edit mode. Once I go into the edit mode, you're going to see that I have an armature system here for opening the box, which is something I talked about in one of the videos here. But once you go into the edit mode here, you're going to see that things change. So objects is 1 out of 15 is like 15, the total number of objects. You have 8 vertices, 8 edges and 2 faces. And so faces is something you want to be focusing on throughout, right? And if you were to select, let's say this, your geonode system, and go into the edit mode, you're going to basically see nothing here because everything is running through a modifier. Now what was happening is, so this particular scene is like my previous version of the project, and you see here we have 9,324,654 faces, and that is a real problem. Not just a problem in rendering, but even in your viewport you see it is significantly lagging even in the solid view. So now if I hit render over here, our last frame took, I don't know, in that one it was taking like 13 seconds as far as I remember. This is gonna go over easily, like so I think this is because of the fact that I have a strong graphic card, that it is still managing to render this in 20 seconds. But yesterday there was a point where I was trying to render it and was taking like a minute for 1 minute 30 seconds to render. And apparently for the first entire part of the video I rendered the frames out with this kind of polygon count, and that's completely unnecessary. It wasn't needed at all. Now where was the problem? How did I figure out what the problem is? Because I was very confused, because what I was trying to do here is, you see this is scattering the foreground trees. If I was to remove this out, right, and if I was to remove these trees out, now removing both of them was actually affecting the polygon count. Like faces have come down to 14,110, but that's not exactly how you want to check. what you want to be checking, because as a matter of fact, the reason we're using geometry nodes is it's one of the reasons. The bigger reason I feel is this is one cohesive system where things can like talk to each other and coordinate with each other, and based on proximity and like raycast, they can move around without you having to manually adjust them. That is a bigger reason. But one additional advantage of geometry nodes is that this is all instances. This is not real geometry, even though that adds to the total geometry in your scene when you're rendering it. But for navigation, it's a lot easier because these are instances. So I was wondering that these 9 million faces are not because of the fact that there are so many trees. I could have like 100 more or 1000 more of these, because at the end of the day, they're just instances. So it is coming from just one particular thing that I'm instancing, which somehow has 9 million faces on it. So I started my inquiry and I was like, what is the thing that we are trying to, what is the exact thing that we are instancing here? That is tree foreground.001. So all of these collections have a .001 here because I made a full copy. You come in here and make a full copy, so everything will come with a .001, so just ignore that. I'm trying to find my tree foreground 001, which is inside my trees collection and over here. So let me shut my geonodes for a minute and let me try and inspect. So what you see is the moment you shut geonodes here, everything has gone to 0 because there's nothing in the scene. But if I open this collection which is being instanced, you see straight away your polygon count has gone to 9 million faces. And that was an aha moment for me, that there is this one tree which for some reason has 9 million polygons on it, and that tree is what I'm instancing across my scene, which is why it is becoming so laggy. So how do you fix this? So this tree, leaves and the entire structure, tree and leaf structure, is something that I've gotten from the sapling tree generator, something I discussed in the last video and the video before that as well. So I want to select everything here that is in my scene, in this particular collection, right? And I want to see what is it that's causing it to peak up to 9 million. So of course it's made up of the bark. If I go into the bark here, you see the bark has 62,792 faces, and these amount of faces is something that you need, because if I try to decimate it beyond that, the tree will stop looking like a tree anymore. Like things will just go apart. Because if you go into the solid view and see, it is already too low poly. I mean, in fact, it's a little more low poly than it should be. If I was to just shut my leaves here and see the bark here, this is almost like acceptable, because there's going to be leaves on top of it and there's going to be fruits on top of it, so you won't see the structure as it is. But if you decimate it beyond it, you will start to lose structural integrity. So 62,000 faces here is okay, no problem. So that was the tree. Now if I go into my leaves here, yeah, that's where you know the things are going wrong, that leaves has 9 million. Just by keeping the leaves on, there are 9 million. So if I come in here into edit mode, this is the interesting part. The leaves itself has only 21,000 polygons. Like these polygons are only 21,000. Then I thought that why is it that this thing has 9 million faces? And that's when I remembered that I have added a geometry nodes modifier on top of these leaves. And if I shut this modifier, there you go. The faces have gone down to 21,000. It was an apple distribution, like just 4 nodes. I was like, wherever there are these leaves, I'm just going to distribute points on faces, and there I'm going to add my apples or my fruit, oranges or whatever. And that was the biggest mistake that I could do, because what this simple looking, deceivingly simple looking, evil node tree is doing is, it's taking those 21,000 faces, and on each of those 21,000 faces, it is instancing or distributing points on those 21,000 faces, even though the density is like 4, but 21,000 faces are being calculated, and there we're instancing these apples. That was the issue. So if you just remove this modifier, now everything is fine the way it should be. If I was to come back to now the question would naturally be, how do you get fruits in that place, in the case. So for fruits, this is what I've done for the main tree. If I come in here into my newer file, and if I was to open the tree main tree, the geonodes tree, I made an entire tree using geonodes and not like the sapling tree generator part of it. And you see that this tree looks a little almost a week. I don't know how else to put it, but let me go to geometry nodes to explain how this whole setup is working. So I showed you the bark situation there, which I've gotten from the sapling tree generator, and I took a single leaf from the sapling tree generator. So this bark is what the group input over here is, tree.005. To that bark, what I have done is I've basically instanced, firstly I've done a grow bark, which means that it's in the group input at the moment. So if I come in here, it's running through these drivers. So for grow bark at the moment, let me delete this driver. right? So what this grow bark is doing is basically looking at the position, the Z position, separate XYZ, and wherever the position is greater than a certain value, it is deleting the geometry. So if I was to reduce this, you will see that we get this growing kind of effect over here. And it's important to use position and not index, because if you use index, there'll be like some weird things happening. So that's how this grow bark is happening. Now for grow leaves, I again took the position and I separate XYZ. So let me just try and solo this thing here. So if I come in here and say Shift Alt, preview this, what you're gonna see is leaves like this. If I want to go to distribute points on faces, we're currently distributing points across all the entirety of the bark. But the selection here has again a position with a separate XYZ with a threshold. So if I come down here and try to increase this threshold, you will see that the less and less of the tree is getting visible. You could also come in here and use index instead. Like if I was to come in here and say index, and again index greater than a certain value, what this would do is, I think we need a different greater than here, yeah, this kind of a greater than, and I put it into selection. That is where points will be distributed. So you'll see that index will give you a lot, like firstly you'll have to drag a lot, so like 100,000, and then you'll get to something like this. But again, this is not exactly what I want, because things underneath are not, I don't want leaves or fruits here, so it's better to use position in the selection instead. And that's how it is working. I think here I need ideally you should be able to eliminate by a little more math, like using an and or an or, eliminate the things in between as well, but this is how I made the selection. The same thing I did for fruits, again position greater than, and that's how I made my geonodes tree, which if you were to look at just this tree here, how do I check what is, yeah, you can't actually check it. All you have to do is you have to come in here and see you have 49.6k vertices and faces of 62,000 faces. So in totality, this tree, which we're going to instance later, has 62,000 polygons or faces, as compared to what we were getting earlier is 9 million polygons or faces. The second important thing that I want to come to is viewport lag with geometry nodes, proxy mesh. So even with this level of understanding that why the polygon count is a problem and everything, when I ended up making the entire scene in my viewport mode, it was like right now, because I think I've started the system fresh and there is no memory or anything to push, it's running just fine. There are no problems at all. But even then I was feeling an incredible amount of lag when I was moving around in my viewport. So for that, there is a very simple proxy that you can add, and now this will start to fly. But again, the thing is that this proxy, it won't give you an exact picture of how something looks, right? Especially in rendered view, if you were to navigate, this will be like a little difficult to navigate. But if I enable proxy here, this will be a lot smoother to navigate, but at the cost of that you are not able to see what things are. So how do you set up this kind of a thing? Again, there is a proxy tree thing that I've made. If I come in and enable this, this is just simply a cone and I've done nothing else to it. And the way you make it work is you have in your group input, you have a switch called proxy, and you add a switch here. If that proxy is in the switch, if that value of that switch is true, you're gonna show your proxy tree, which is just the cone. And if it is false, you're going to show the tree foreground one, which we just discussed. So that was the second point. It helps in like navigating the viewport when things are a lot more complex in terms of the geometry nodes tree. Third thing was wrapping a texture on a box complexity. So I'm going to show you the things that I was given to for the box, and I will eventually get to showing the render as well. Just have a little patience there. So this is the final artwork that I was shown, which has to wrap over the box. And there was one reference image that I had to work with to understand how it will actually go over the box. So this is the reference image that I have, and this here was the artwork that was given to me, and it took me a little bit of time to try and wrap my head around how this thing will wrap around the box. So I also had to take my dad's help for it. So let me show you how this works. So firstly, what I did is I took this into, obviously inside, if I just select my box, solo the box. So obviously what this is a cube, okay, if I stay in my rendered view, and I added seams. So one thing I understood from looking at the references that this, I did not quite understand it myself. My dad helped me understand that this part is the top. So the top is this part, okay. This part is the bottom, so the bottom faces this part, and these here are basically I'll think about it. I'm still not very sure what, but these are basically your sizes, and if you look at, they come in here, and I think it should be a little more towards the center, like this one. Why is this not in the center? Let's try and fix this right now. If I select this face, it's not exactly in the center. What we could do is we can just take this UV and move it down, and I will put it in the center. So there's one kind of thing which goes in like this, then there are two of these stripes here. Again, I'm not exactly sure that this is how the box wraps, but this is the best that I could understand more or less on how to make it happen. Like, this is my final scene where from after the deform render we transition into the apple tree render, and over here an apple falls from the top, and as the apple is falling down we have the camera tracking it down. So basically I haven't added keyframes on the camera. This camera had a track 2 constraint on it. If I can select my camera, the camera had an object constraint on it of track 2, and tracking 2 was on the focus, which is this object here. So I basically animated the focus down, and so what is happening is the camera is looking down, because you don't want to actually have a lot of keyframes on the camera. It gets a little messy and stuff. So the apple falls down is basically like your regular keyframes. I think over here as well, for the apples inside the box, I did like a very simple simple instance on points and added the apples there, because it gives you a lot more control. Instead of just manually placing things, you can add a random rotation, add a random scale. If you want to check it out, I'll just show you the apples in box. Again, it's a very simple setup here, and I've added some form of selection to not have it all over the place. And then you can actually come and rotate it like randomly if you wanted to, but I haven't done quite that. I've added a little set position towards the end. One thing I was thinking about that I have to document, which is still left, is the fact that once this comes down, this closes. So one thing that I also learned is how do you have the inside of the box look a little different, because if I was to go into my solid view, you will see that this box has additional faces. So what I've done is, if you were to by default wrap it the way it is, what would happen is you would see whatever is on the outside. I've duplicated them. Okay, so yeah, let me just move that up. So you will see that by default, if there is only one face, and this is how things work inside Blender, is if there is only one face and you've added a material to that face, like you've texture unwrapped it, it will show on the front and the back like a mirror kind of thing. I think there is probably a way you can do back face culling and have nothing show here, but I don't want nothing to show here. I want like cardboard to show here. So I duplicated it and placed it on top, and inside my materials I added like a cardboard material to it. So for instance, if I was to select this material and assign the original material to it, by default this is something you would see, but I duplicated that material and I assigned cardboard to it. So that's how this is coming. And I've done the same kind of trick to all these other faces inside, because I want a cardboard sort of look there. So if I come in and move this here, you're going to see that underneath you're going to see by default, where you just have a cube unwrapped, you're going to see all of this thing coming inside, which you don't want. So just duplicate it and place it on top, like a nice kind of workaround for a situation. What are the few things that I still want to do about this scene that I could not do? One is the fact that I could not figure out how to render in Eevee and make it look good enough for as good enough as cycles, because it was looking extremely bad, especially because when you see the cycles render and then you see the Eevee render, you'll be like, oh no, this is not workable. So Eevee is something I could not figure here. Other than that, what more optimization could I do? With my trees and my polygon count, 170,000 is the maximum I could optimize the scene to, and beyond that would be a little more difficult. Yeah, all in all, I'm super happy with this project because I ended up learning so much in the process of making it, and especially because the last environment render I did for the coconut tree and the coconut beach, that was so extremely unoptimized that if I just did like a fraction of the optimization I did in this scene, even that scene would have rendered as fast as this one did. But again, as I mentioned, that in that particular project I was on a very strong deadline, and so I had to take like iRender, GPU render farm and put money in there too. But even that was a very good experience because I got to learn that. And yeah, if I had like a RTX 4090 card, and I could just render unoptimized scenes out very easily, I don't think I would be so satisfied as I am right now, because again, optimization is so important. Like, you get to learn so much when you optimize your scenes, and something which in an unoptimized scene is taking 1 minute and 10 seconds to render, if you can render that same scene out without losing quality in 10 seconds, you are a good 3D generalist. So I show you the final render as well, because I've been just talking and I haven't showed the final render. So sit back, and this is not the final render. Like, of course there's going to be some client change or whatever, but this is where we are, and I'm going to play this. So sit back and enjoy. Like, some good sound design I've done in the matter of like last 5 minutes or so, but okay, so inside my After Effects project, what is it that I have to show here? These are your color correction layers. So without the color correction, straight out of Blender renders, this was looking very dark. So I added a layer of color correction, and what I've basically done inside Lumetri is increase the exposure, no contrast. For contrast, I've come into curves and just did this kind of a thing. I think it makes it really good, and I've added a bit of saturation to the whole thing. So inside creative, I've added sharpen, because if I'm rendering at like lesser samples, it's always good to have more samples. And I think I added a saturation of 120 or so. Right now it's not showing. Deform render here, I've done 2 passes. So as I showed in yesterday's video, by the time it was coming here, what was happening is the ink of the printer was running out. And so eventually I wanted to transition to an apple tree situation so that this could more or less morph into what I had made. So what I did is I made 2 renders. I took the frame from here, like the 300th frame, if I see 300th frame, and put that as an init to my second pass. And for that I did quite a few passes actually. If I show you my deform renders, I did fillers, like I did 6 filler passes. So starting from this frame, it took me quite a while to come to that, because again here you see the printer running out situation was still a thing. Then I did another filler render. These are just 150 frames I kept rendering over and over. And again towards this end, like, it was becoming green apples instead of red apples, even though in the prompt I clearly said red bright apples. And this kept happening for a few trials. So filler 4 is when I thought, let me just take the original orange tree, and try to make that into an apple tree. But then I figured that there's going to be a consistency problem if I just randomly change that. So I had to start from that frame only. And I did that for 2 renders here. Again, here I was trying to play with the prompts and everything and trying to make it work. So the final render, which you see, is I started from this frame, the 300th frame. And then I think worked with prompts a little. I didn't change any noise settings or any CFG values. It just was like playing with the prompts. So initially what I did is, from this point, I gave it a prompt to go to an orange tree with oranges, and from the orange tree I gave it the prompt to go to apple tree with apples, and that somehow seemed to work. And then towards the end we have this. Over here there's a bit of a glitch when the camera goes from removing track to constraint to like normal keyframes, but I tried a lot to figure out how that would work, but I couldn't. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers whatever I had to document for this particular render. Thank you so much for being on the journey. 4 days of trying to figure this out, and here we are. I'm super happy and satisfied with how the render looks. More importantly, how much effort I put into optimizing and making the scene how it should be, and making sure that the render times are under like 10 seconds or 15 seconds, which is why we've been able to share the video. And from this point on, I have to make like node groups for this node 3, so that next time when I want to make a displacement on the ground, or I want to scatter some things, or even the trees, I want to have them in my asset library so that I don't have to keep making them from scratch every single time, because that's how you build up on your like bank of content. Because you spend so much time making apple trees, orange trees, coconut trees in the previous versions, you just might as well use them, right? Don't start making things from scratch every single time. So for that, you can stick around and we'll obviously document that journey as well. So thanks so much for being in the code. I will catch you tomorrow. Peace.